I'm 46 years old now. I'm a husband. I have a baby. I'm a family man. I came into bodybuilding very late into my life, about 25, 26. So it's been 20 years. So 20 years of 24/7, complete investment, like passion, motivation, willpower, etc. Before that, I was into music, and because I was such an extreme person, I did a band. We took 10 years to make 2 albums. We got signed in Europe. I had my own record label. I had my own radio show. We toured over all Canada. Eventually, I realized that music was not where I would grow as a person, especially financially. And I started bodybuilding because I was single and I was kind of fat, out of shape, blah, blah, blah. And I saw the EAS magazine, the Phillips brother, and I got into bodybuilding natural for a very long time. I went from 240 fat to 167 model type. And what I was actually modeling for real, I said, it's not me. I'm not that pretty boy. I want to be a monster. And my neighbor was a steroid dealer. Mm-hmm. And he just said the word steroid, and I said, I want it, And I plunged. And as an extreme person, obviously, my first cycle lasts an entire year. And that would be like 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, it was not like today, today you can order, especially in Canada from UGL, any cycle you want, buy 16 weeks ahead. Back then, you buy every week and you get whatever is there. So it didn't really make sense, but over a year it works. And after a year, I kind of, at 240, I gained back to 240 in a year. I felt side effect and stuff. So I did 1 year on, 1 year off, 1 year on, 1 year off. And eventually I felt that I was ready to compete into bodybuilding. And as I compete into bodybuilding, I learned the hard way, the hardcore way. I was a bit maybe more, stubborn or whatever. I didn't believe any book or anyone. I said I have to do it on my own. And I truly extrapolate the business. And then eventually I realized that it was very expensive. So I moved to New York. I opened an escort agency and I make tons of money. And I could afford being a bodybuilder. And I could afford to sponsor other athletes and even afford anything I wanted in peptide, GH, blah, blah, blah. And by that time, that's when I went into online. And I wrote my real name with my real picture, with my real cycle and everything. And as far as I know, I was the first one in the world to do that. Because in Canada, we have the legality to, pretty do whatever you want. It's a pretty free land, I guess. Still is nowadays. Might change. But so they had a bit of a wild clown, but at the same time, there was extrapolation of radical truth. So I came as a subversive hardcore for the intellectual rebel community of the bodybuilding. So it's very, very, very micro niche, but it was very popular. It was extremely popular. At one point, I had the GH15 status. I had over 200,000 people reading my blog and stuff. And eventually, I was in India, got sick, almost died, senior debt. And I went to complete wisdom. And instead of parting with my money, I said, I will add knowledge. I said, I don't want to have fun anymore. I want to be a smart man with smart muscle. And I wanted to be a great coach. And I won 4 pro card at that point. And I wanted to have my own bodybuilding show. And we did that. We had 7 sport, 2,000 people came. So as a bodybuilder, I won overall Windsor. I placed first super heavy. National, I was out, not good enough. Worked with Robin Strand, won his pro card in Master Man, Christopher Wong. Master Woman Robin D. And I think I won. I'm probably going to win the North Americans in Master Classic with Toko Tyler this year in 5 weeks from now.
How old were you when you first started training? Do you remember how old you were? You said you started as a natural. How old were you?
I was a bit dumb. I start everything at once. So
you went straight in.
Training. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And what age were you when you started that?
I started 26. Way too old. 26.
And how many years of exposure to performance enhancement did you have?
So I would say in 18, 20 years of training, I was 9 years on. 4.5 years was moderate to low dose, often 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off, 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off. Because I was using my body as a form of income. I could not be too big. It was not commercial, picture, I was framed. And eventually with the industry, I could make so much money that I didn't care for size. And that's when I went hardcore. I went for 4.5 years, not straight, but a good 4 years that, insulin, GH, all the compound. And when I started education, I went to my Ph.D. in therapeutic approach, but I had over 150 certification and I met 333 practitioners. So that means I get the best in someone in a specific industry and I hire him and he coach me in those very profound conversations to learn as quick because there's too many spheres I'm interested in, Theology, philosophy, psychoanalysis, functional medicine, functional neurology.
So it sounds to me like your initial introduction, at least, to enhancement was very uneducated, and you grew as a human and developed skills, and this was something that happened in a fairly organic process over your career. That's fair to say?
That's fair to say. It's exactly what happened, and it still has an influence on how do I approach things, because eventually younger kids, they still have that kind of stubbornness. I need to find myself on my own enhancement path somehow. So even though you will come with clarification, they still have to process it themselves to actually learn it and embody it.
So I mentioned to you before we started the call that, I mean, you have a tremendous profile. I don't think there's anyone that's been in this tribe for multiple decades that doesn't remember reading at least something that you've written, something you've contributed to the community. And I mentioned that one of the things that we have in common is I like to use a number of synergistic compounds rather than dragging out a 20-pound sledgehammer and smashing on the androgen receptor alone, like looking at multiple metabolic pathways and upregulating those relatively small amounts of drugs, but a relatively long list of compounds. I think is that a fair description of your strategy typically?
The way I see it, Lou, is it's very hard to do blood panels still in Canada. You can, but it's kind of a headache. So it kind of weakens some parameters, but at the same time, the body doesn't lie. So picture doesn't lie. It's a radical truth of what's going on. And you can see body, face, skin, waist. There's body marker that, I'm not a doctor, I don't do a diagnostic, but it's like it gives you a pretty narrow bandwidth of what's going on. And if you use multi-perspective pharmacology, you said, I don't know what works on you, but if I do everything, something will work. And that's it.
Okay. All right, so I wanted to, if possible, to better understand the reason behind some of the choices that you are have been relatively public. But I remember watching I think it was a muscular development segment that you did a little while ago, maybe a couple of years ago, and you were fairly outspoken about your position on Masteron. You sort of said that Masteron is not something that you feel that the physique development of bodybuilding community get a great deal of value from. Can you expand on why you feel that way?
It's because in the neurobiosocial model, we look at on the social model, you look at the interpersonal neurobiology. And Masteron means often aggression. That's why Masteron and Tate would be great on MMA fighter. So you still need aggression. The thing is, it needs to be contained in the gym, but not outside of it. So what I did, the BLP version of Masteron, there's actually two. The day of the fast, all my bodybuilder mostly fast, 24, 36 hours. Fast has good beneficial on testosterone production. And the day they fast, they do a 200 reps deadlift in 20 minutes. So that's, you see the autophagy goes to redox, detox, stem cell, mitochondrial health.
Sorry, my style is usually, I apologize if I do this, but I typically ask a lot of questions because I want to learn. Can I just ask you to clarify things that are going on? So when you say that fasting increases or escalates testosterone production, I guess I'm somewhat containing this conversation to people who are using performance enhancing compounds. So for example, if you're using Masteron, your HPTA is effectively shut down. It shuts down in very short fashion. So I don't follow what you mean. What do you mean by testosterone production increases during fasting because there is no production of testosterone under that circumstance?
You could Google the research, Leydig cell and autophagy, and then you see the positive outcome. So there's a research for it.
So what you're suggesting is, even though there is a negative feedback loop in play due to the presence of androgens at supraphysiological levels, and LH and FSH are effectively shut down for all intents and purposes, that a single day of fasting is able to restore both LH and escalate testosterone levels in a meaningful fashion in someone that's enhanced?
I would not go as far as you interpret it because you kind of make it overly positive. But what I'm saying is, if we use Masteron as a specific day of aggression on a day that you do a deadlift that's very demanding, it's almost like you do a fast day. It's like a God day. It's like fast day, it's rest day, but fast day, it's you're gonna do 200 rep deadlift with either 225 pounds or whatever the 65 one rep max of your deadlift. So there's kind of this mission of intensity, which will make you sweat, which will bring metabolic activation, and there's the benefit of fasting. And at the same time, there's the Masteron. So me, I use Masteron only one day a week, like letrozole, on the fasting day, which is a day of deadlift day. So deadlift, high rep, fasting, Masteron, letrozole, one day a week. That's how I do it.
So perhaps I could explain some fundamentals of my recommendations to people, and then you can maybe better, because I understand, I probably have a slight advantage here as I've listened to some of your communication and maybe you're not familiar with much. So one of my messages to people is, if you are interested in the long-term safer use of these compounds, and I use the word safer, not safe, right? I believe that most individuals should really stick with what we would consider to be approved for human use drugs, right? Drugs that we have good clinical data on, the efficacy and the adverse events in human beings, ideally drugs that have passed standardized toxicity testing, ideally drugs that have been in our community for decades of use. We know these drugs well. It's in some cases, I agree, a bit the better the devil you know, but we know these drugs. Yep. And so in that case, when you look at anabolics, I would say, okay, so you should really have two piles of drugs, a pile of drugs that we'll call situational use drugs that we might use on occasion, and then drugs I like to refer to as basal PEDs, or drugs that we are firm friends with, that we get to know over a multi-decade time frame. And the drugs, basically, as you look at them, I think you should look at these drugs and place them in one or two of these piles. So drugs that are methylated orals, in my opinion, shouldn't be used on a daily basis for multi-year time frames. They belong in the situational use basket. Yeah. So when you look at anabolic steroids, you could pretty quickly go down the list and say, well, testosterone, nandrolone, primobolan, Masteron, and Anavar are drugs that very clearly fit into this category of, basal use. These are drugs well understood, long histories of human use, good clinical data to support their efficacy and safety. Most of the other drugs don't belong. They fit into situational use. And so over a multi-year time frame, you're kind of going, well, you only have 5 drugs, testosterone, nandrolone, primobolan, Masteron, and Anavar, to what, for want of a better word, live on. And I am not necessarily a big fan of nandrolone, not for everybody. And I know you've said that yourself historically. It's a good drug for some people some of the time, okay? But if you then go, okay, so we've really got 3 drugs that we have to rotate. My proposal is over 20 years, including Masteron, primobolan, and Anavar in the basal, is just from a first pass point of view, well, that's a very logical, rational, forget the evidence, forget the efficacy of these drugs. At that point, that just makes a logical starting point. Do you follow where I begin that conversation with? It's 4
Yes.
drugs. Okay, so then I don't believe that if you go, well, I'm not going to use Masteron because it doesn't suit our purposes, I would ask the question, well, we certainly know that it's extremely well tolerated by human beings. When it was in human clinical use in women, it was deployed at 300 milligrams a week in women with very good side effect profile, far better than nandrolone, for example, in women at the same dose. It's not liver toxic, it's not kidney toxic. It has a fabulous safety profile. And if you look at the Hirschberger assays that are done on rat models, and I'm the first person to agree that that's not the final word in anything, it has a myotropic ratio of about 4 times better than testosterone. So I don't follow what your fault in the drug is. Under what pathway would you say that it escalates aggression to the point it's not, I'm not saying it doesn't escalate aggression, I agree, but to the point where you would want to avoid its use is what I'm interested in.
Okay, so the thing is, you have to understand that to me, I'm like on the center left and center right politically. So I will not completely bend fully to science. And what I care about is more result and the narrative of the mission of people that compete.
Yep.
I'm not saying Masteron is healthy, but Masteron will easily bring you to 4% body fat, which is not normal, right? So if we do once a week, it has the punch, it doesn't really have side effect, and it goes very smooth. If you do 2-3 times a week, then aggression goes up. And me, I'm anti-aggression. I'm pro-love. I want the person to be loving, caring, nurturing, well-aligned, well-coordinated, eye-hand coordination, muscle-mind connection, muscle-mind decision-making, no gambling, no drugs, no nothing. I know I've done it, but I don't want people to do the stupid stuff I did. So once a week, it has the crazy deadlift. If you do Masteron once a week, you will have always an astonishing, aggressive, positive training. If you will do a week basis type Masteron, then I will do very low dose, 10, 12 milligram sub-skin every day. So I will make the Masteron work, but underneath is stress, adrenaline input, whatever. I will modulate neurotransmitter, magnesium, GABA, taurine, at least 2-3 times a day to make the person smooth. You know, I talk to you, you feel smooth, you feel grounded, you're very smart, you're connected, you're all there with me. So I would not be scared to say, hey, bro, try Masteron. But if the guy is nervous, seems aggressive, it's like, I feel that it's not really made for him. You know?
No, that's
because
cool. So what would you use in its place?
In use of Masteron, I will use, there will be no comparative somehow, but I like testosterone, EQ, because primobolan, yes, it builds a lot of muscle, but that's another compound that could easily tend for aggression. So if I use EQ as a base 16 weeks out, cut it maybe at 2 weeks. Within, let's say, the 7 weeks out of a contest, I will use Primobolan instead of Masteron for someone that doesn't like it or get too anxious or even psychotic or neurotic on it. And I will use Primobolan there, but I will put 2 gyms a day of 45 minutes. So I will double gym intensity to make sure that the aggression, it's relief, let go, you know.
Well, I certainly agree with the Primobolan. In my opinion, Primobolan is the gold standard of safer use of these compounds. It's a fabulous compound. It's my personal favorite. Right. But my concern here is, so here's my blunt question for you. So I'm sure you know this. In 1967, approximately, equipoise, or at the time Boldenone, was evaluated for human use, and it failed and was never adopted for human use because it is toxic on the kidneys and toxic on the liver. We have an abundance of evidence to support this. So you would prefer to take a drug that is known to be liver toxic and known to be kidney toxic over a drug that, it has been in human use for men. This is the question I have. So it's not so much
because you have to go at the root cause of the plan. For me, a bodybuilder is 10 years and then you stop. You go ART if you want. It's a 10-year span. It's a 10 years extreme span. And it's a 7-8 months type cycle on off, and then 4 months off.
Why is it
has a very long rest. So they go wild, but they have a very long rest.
I understand. Why is it 10 years though? Because that's all you can get away with?
I personally think, I know that we're both older guys, and you're an older guy with decent size. If it's not a monster level, I will say that if you're not Dexter Jackson, to do hardcore bodybuilding, what I mean by that is off season to 4% body fat, off season to body, insulin, GH, 1GF, etc. 10 years max.
Okay.
Because more than that, it's too dangerous. And I think the body can recover from 10 years of mature abuse.
I guess this is where we have a separation point, and we'll probably always have different perspectives, because I believe that if you create a natural base, as you said, you at the beginning, you came straight out the gate, straight onto steroids the first day you started training. I, however, trained for 20 years as a natural before I touched anything.
Which is much better.
Yeah, so I think if you do 20 years as a natural, and then you slowly sort of introduce testosterone, and you slowly introduce the human approved drugs, and you don't push into multi-gram dosages, there's no reason that you have to stop after 10 years. You can keep going as long as I do agree with it. The requirements of world-class bodybuilding today. I mean, I always say to people as a coach, look, if you want to drag your ass onto the Olympus stage, I am not your man. I would never get you there with my philosophies and my approaches. I'm simply
that's my plan. My plan is, when I talk, I only talk top national super heavy bodybuilder. If you talk to a classic, then it's more like, there's more flexibility, openness, and then figure that, and then male physique, it kind of trimmed down. But if you want to be a 300-pound monster and be somewhat healthy and place a top 3 national for a few years, get your pro card, and maybe crack top 5, top 8 in a pro circuit in not the 212, but the big league, I think 10 years is it's
no, I agree. I guess that's where, as I said, our two strategies diverge somewhat, because I try to encourage people to stay with drugs that have been approved for human use, so we don't have to expose ourselves unnecessarily to stress, but at the same time realize outcomes which are justified by enhancement practices at all. What's the point of using these drugs if you're not carrying unnatural levels of outcomes? That's the whole reason to use them. So I understand where you're coming from. My premise was that, and this is where I wanted to clarify. I've heard you speak of that before, and I could never understand. So why would you set Masteron aside, as I said, a drug that is very well tolerated in human beings, The only reason it was removed from market is because it was displaced by a drug that did the job better. There was never any concerns over it with a drug that shouldn't be used in people. It's a horse drug. I could never understand that, but that's the extreme.
It is a cultural and generational gap. And what I mean by that is the young kids that are 25, they don't live with the quality of food you had when you were young. They don't live in the same societal pressure of academic and have a future. And it's not the same sense of security, sadly enough to say. In Canada, there's privilege, because being a hardcore bodybuilder in a 300-pound plus off season, it's kind of an upper middle class, or you cannot afford it, bro. You cannot afford $50,000 of growth hormone a year if you're not upper middle class. And often those people, they're a bit different than the traditional, let's say, on a budget bodybuilder.
Yep.
And there's a sensibility in new generation that wasn't really there before, because the mom starts working, because it's let's say my granddad goes in university, it was 18,000. Now in Toronto, it's 200,000. His a house was 200,000. Now where I live, worth 1.5 million. It's not the same. So what I mean by that is Masteron will stress the person. Of course, if you have an outstanding genetic that take it well and remain calm, that's good. I will keep it at maximum 300. But for someone that's a bit more like nervous, anxious, which is almost like the 80% of the population. And the thing is, most young bodybuilder don't go in bodybuilder because they're outstanding athlete. They go in bodybuilding because insecurity, because they need to protect and shield their image, because they want to project a monster that they're actually teddy bear inside. So me, I understand or attract those kind of people that we extrapolate both understanding aggression and decency and have, not ending in jail, not ending in drugs, not ending party, and create that ecosystem. That's why with Masteron, I'm always a bit more safer, or let's say father figure.
Could you explain to me the mechanism of action by which we see a disproportional amount of aggression from this compound compared to other compounds from the same class? Why does Masteron, in your opinion, create this problem?
You have to understand that the human being at the metaphysical state work with glial cell, which is both connected to inflammatory marker and creativity and immunity at the same time, and the vagal nerve which connect digestion, metabolism, and the interpretation of sense of safety, and the vagal nerve in the connection to the others in terms of empathy and intimacy and sexuality and communication. That kind of entrepreneurial skill is it's very old, coming back from the prenatal life and early development. And, the thing is, if bodybuilder wants to be 300 pound of muscle, it's because he wants to surpass the superhuman state to find who he is. There's this kind of a mythological or archetypal history narrative, and he's going to give his life, his money, his all in himself for his pro card. And for some people, it looks completely dumb, but at the same time, I understand the willpower of that. So I think the aggression comes from the central nervous system, sensory process, sense of regulation, basal ganglia, thalamus, moral reflex, the sense of fear, the sense of safety, etc. But I would say it dabble with the body, the hypertense. Not smooth, but hypertense. And you want some kind of tension, you want the fullness, you want the hardness, but you don't want a hardness that the person doesn't embody it well. That's why when I coach a bodybuilder, I coach his wife and him, because his wife will tell me how aggressive he is. So I don't use blood chemistry. I look, yesterday he gave a punch in the wall because he was not happy because I say no to sex. I said, okay, we'll see
How do you know if someone is taking, going back to that example of,
yeah.
so if someone's chasing that extreme, as you said, the 300-pound thing, these guys are on 30 milligrams per kilogram of anabolics, and they're often using Trenbolone. They're very often exposed to halotestin and all sorts of drugs that have the potential to, and have been anecdotally connected to increased aggression. So how do you separate Masteron from, say, Trenbolone and say it's the Masteron is my interest?
Okay.
So let me add one more piece to that. So I'm sure you would agree with me. This is very easy to dismiss the statement, but I think it's fair. Most people, in my experience, in that tribe, not necessarily in the community that I tend to educate, would refer to testosterone, Trenbolone, and Masteron as the magic three. They're almost never used, unless they're used together. So if someone was exhibiting like 1,000 milligrams of testosterone a day, which is, I understand your recommendation for baseline testosterone, 1,000 to 1,200, and 300 or 400 milligrams of Trenbolone a day, which I understand that you support that dose, and they're using 300 or 400 milligrams of Masteron, how do you know it's the Masteron that's causing that?
I'm not a fan of abuse as much as I was. As I get older, I change over time, and I will say my openness now, it's more like, let's see where's your threshold, and let's see where's the threshold what's your threshold is, and what's your threshold do to your body, and what kind of result it brings, and does it work the risk-benefit ratio, and was it worldwide, and are you made to be a bodybuilder? So think again, I plan 10 years ahead, 7-8 months cycle, 4 months rest, but the 4 months rest, the last month of rest, I want you big natural. So if we do 200, 220, 200, 220 natural, 250 the 4th, 5th years, and after 5-6 years, you're on growth hormone, little bit of insulin, little bit of anti-catabolism supplementation, and you're 5'9" at 285, 10% body fat, natural, technically natural, you have the pro card. You cannot look like a freak as a natural. It's like you won the pro card. You won the pro card because you can handle big size naturally. You're not hooked to hormones forever. Of course, you have to eventually, in the 10-year span, I'm not saying abuse for 10 years, but eventually there's the learning curve of abuse. And there's a lot of advantage for that because you understand your limits, you understand where you get sick, you understand what's the role of your own myostatin, and how much your genetic actually help you. And if we increase the neurobiosocial model, we help genetic response. We can alter positively, not to extreme range, but still it's positive.
So the reason I ask this question is, if you were to turn this around to me and ask me, so why does Trenbolone seem to cause aggression? Why do we sweat at night when we take Trenbolone? Why does Trenbolone seem to cause aggression in a lot of people? I can give you my answer. It's very simple. Right. So Trenbolone is a compound that's very capable of binding with the progesterone receptor. And we know that synthetic progestins through HRT for women are very bad for your brain. They can cause all sorts of very strange cognitive function issues, synthetic progestins. And the fact that Trenbolone binds with the progesterone receptor and it's synthetic progestin clearly points to that I would predict that drug is going to cause cognitive issues simply by its mechanism of action and its affinity for the progesterone receptor. The point is, I'm giving an explanation for why Trenbolone causes aggression. This is the pathway. I'm trying to get you to give me an understanding of, so under what mechanism of action would Masteron cause that? You're saying observationally it's true, but you don't know why that was. Is that correct? Am I misreading that?
Yes and no. Yes and no. The thing is, when you look at the body is a symphony, is an orchestra. You cannot have HCG too high or too low. It has to be somewhat in the middle. The 1GF is the same thing. You don't want too low 1GF. And too high, yes, you build muscle, but you're going to die sooner. So there's regulation. Estrogen, progesterone is actually very healthy. You want low, mid estradiol. You don't want estradiol on the floor because that's hard on cognition. You don't want high. You don't want too much prolactin, but you don't want zero either. So it's that kind of a symphony. And the thing is, the symphony for me of hormones made you smile, made you happy, made you not only build size, but feel good, feel great, and being great. So when I see the person coming, I open my observation skill and I try to feel in an empathy connection how much that person great. And the thing is, I want the person to go from, let's say, 13, 14% body fat to 16 weeks out to 4% body fat, dry, full, hard, always happy. I mean, not 24/7, but in that ecosystem of let's dabble with drugs, and yes, near the end you need tren, and yes, Masteron will help, but at the same time we look at the well-being of the person. Maybe it's not the scientific approach you like, but me, I'm into an therapeutical setting, you know, and it's the coaching that it's more of a mentoring. It's more of a nest of protection where you feel you've been looked at, you have this company, you have this presence that's following you. And I use the judge panel as the God that decide what's going to happen with you.
Okay, cool. So I appreciate your input there. I just wanted to ask you about SARMs and specifically your interest in the SARM slash myostatin inhibitor YK11. You seem to be very bullish on this drug. Can you explain to me why you are bullish on this compound?
I don't fully abolish it. The problem is kids, they were overusing it. What I mean by that is, for me, the YK regulation, the upregulation for me, stop around 3 milligrams for a 45-minute span. So I will use it only twice. So that means pre-workout, because of the myostatin inhibition will help muscle performance to grow. So as you train intense, eventually the myostatin block building muscle. So you could, you know, elongate the posture of building muscle while you're training a bit longer. And I will use it before sleep. But because of his DHT 1GF affinity, it's the same thing. It's you want growth to shorten telomere and lifespan. So I will say YK11, yes. Below 27 years old, yes. Maybe 2-3 times a year max, 2-3 weeks max, and very low dose. And yes, it could be a bit bad, but it's going to work. But you put YK11 when you have testosterone, anabolic, oral, steroids, GH, insulin, and then YK. To take YK with RAD and NK, for me, maybe it's a beach body type, but it doesn't make sense. YK is great, but in the 5th, 6th position, very low dose, very short duration.
So let me ask you about, I have my concerns that it's actually even a myostatin inhibitor, and let me explain why. There is a tremendous unmet need for a safe and effective myostatin inhibitor. I don't think anyone is going to argue this. You know, even outside our tribe, if you look at the clinical application for sarcopenia treatment, the clinical application for muscle wasting diseases, the need for a myostatin inhibitor is clear and present. Anyone understands this. The challenge, of course, is this, and that is, over the last decade, more than 15 drugs, millions of dollars have been spent, and not one of those compounds that show tremendous promise at some point, hence the millions of dollars investment, have actually shown to actually work. Yeah, at the point where they've, you know, said, okay, so here's a clinically effective myostatin inhibitor. It's not the need; it's there isn't yet a drug. So, for example, even like ACE-031 was abandoned. There's a reason it was abandoned. It's not being under continued development. My question to you is, when it comes to YK11, so from an evidence perspective, we have a total of 4 papers to consider. 3 are effectively bench studies, mechanistic models, and 1 is a doping study where they gave a single dose to evaluate metabolites for doping testing. But it's a bit of a stretch to say, look, all of these pharmaceutical companies for decades have been seeking a myostatin inhibition agent for sarcopenia treatment, for muscle wasting diseases like muscular dystrophy. No one has yet come up with the magic juice, but here's a compound that's cheap and readily available. It's the holy grail. It does everything everyone wants to know, and yet it's been abandoned and never even been tested in a rat. It's a bit of a stretch. Like I look at it and go,
the thing is, you have to understand the system of current economy. You know, there's a big capitalism output. So you don't look at research, you look how much money the pharmaceutical industry can do with that. And eventually $1 million business for pharmaceutical company, it's worthless. It's very intriguing in the research compound of gray area of bodybuilding, and that's where there's lots of loop and curiosity toward it, because eventually research pharmacy will say there's not enough money in it. There's budget in fertility, in vivo, in vitro fertility.
Can I just pull you up there, though? Can I just pull you up there, though? Although I understand the point you're making, I would argue that sarcopenia is the single largest market that possibly exists for a tool that basically, creates anabolic outcomes. Why? Because we all, at some point, are going to experience age-related muscle loss. It's the biggest single market there is, yeah?
I don't think so. I think that the system is made not to make you feel better, but to be a constant consumer, a specific medicine. So you see that, let's say ARO-290, which is a peptide that heals peripheral nerve. It heals peripheral nerve. Really ignored by the medical system, but not ignored in Korea, in Japan, in Russia. So within your ideology, you have to beware. I know I'm not conspiracy thinking, but some country really wants to heal. Some country really just wants your money. So you have to be biased. And what's fun about bodybuilding and research is that the gray area where it's not illegal and legal. At first, in myostatin blocker was Foley 344. Then it was Mio-Pro-Peptide. Then it was ACE-031. Then it was ACE-081. And then, 083, then 031. Then it was GDF8 with the antibody. And then they discovered GDF11 toward longevity and the anti-myostatin count. And that's where it's get intriguing. So me, I will forget the entire history of myostatin, put that in garbage, but GDF11 could be the opening of the future of bodybuilding enhancement within 5-10 years.
This is what I find intriguing about your whole philosophy, though. That's, speaking to you from the first time, it's very evident that you are interested in longevity and a full life. And, I don't know, I'm probably not choosing the right words, but you don't come across as this get big or die trying guy, at least anymore. You come across as a very balanced.
No, I did it. I done it.
But my concern always with these types of compounds, it's like the GW1516 combination. I don't think anyone is going to argue the value of a potential PPAR agonist, but that compound was abandoned, and the reason it was abandoned is that at every single dose it was tested, it failed standardized toxicology testing. They were effectively forced to walk away from that research chemical because you have to pass that testing in order to get to market. And I don't mean it failed. I mean, they tested at multiple doses and every single dose failed, right? So my point is, it seems a little bit contradictory where you have an individual that's very much about that, and yet you're talking about research chemicals that have never even been tested in a rat, which I would say is the highest possible risk model there is. We have no idea what's going to happen if you take that drug.
I know. I'm gonna tell you my truth. Okay. Today everything is poison. Water is poison. Maybe not in Thailand, but in Canada, water is not. It's not great. You need reverse osmosis. You have to clean your water. You have to make sure there's no iron. There's this. There's that. So the upper privileged people, they could able to be clean up money, but they need the money. They need the knowledge. They need to protect themselves. And even if you buy the healthiest yams that exist for millions of years, very good on hormones production, very good, very healthy, very anti-inflammatory, there's still oxalate in it, and some people are allergic to oxalate. So you pick your poison. You know, aspartame will be neurotoxic, HCG will aromatize. It's hard to find compounds that are pure, you know, maybe some specific full spectrum CBD or curcumin or some peptide like humanin that's actually the repair hormone. So if you cannot bypass a 1-GFLR3 thinking you're going to use YK11 at $40 to have the same thing, right? So there's this huge curiosity to save money and have the beneficial outcome. I don't really believe in it. I think that quality would come with the cost. And I'm not a big fan of Increlex, and maybe DS1GF or PEG MGF as 1GF version are much healthier and stuff. But I would say if you want to spend money, growth hormone, new spin, you know, right from the pharmacy. Right now in Canada, it's getting a little easier to get GH prescription by private endocrinology. It's less checked because our quality of steroids are astonishing in Canada, but quality GH is very mismatched and very chaotic. So you can get prescription.
Do you follow my point though? What I'm saying is, I try to recommend to guys to say, look, I think that you should consider, I'm not saying don't experiment. We all like to experiment. That's half the fun of doing these things. But you should say, look, if I'm going to do this for the next, let's say a 20-year period of time, I want to spend the vast majority of my time using drugs that we have fabulous clinical data to support their safer use. Approved for human use, high quality products, insulin, growth hormone, metformin, et cetera, drugs that we can use that with and hold up, like testosterone has, 2,000 human clinical trials on it. Why would you look at something like SARMs, which no SARMs has ever been approved for human use, and most SARMs have less than a trial on a human? Like recently, I'm sure you're familiar, you mentioned RAD 140 before. They've just completed the first human trial of RAD 140. I'm sure you're familiar with that in breast cancer women. And 30% of the women who used this had liver elevation, liver enzyme elevations, 30%. That is the same percentage of people exposed to 100 milligrams of anadrol a day. Now, I would not, by any stretch of the imagination, consider anadrol to be a liver-safe subject, but then you have a drug that has never been tested in humans. They finally put it into humans at 60 milligrams a day, and a full 30% of the individuals who took the drug, the same percentage of people that were exposed to anadrol had liver enzymes. So we go from a drug that, it's safe because it's never been tested. And I'm saying to people, maybe you need to think about that and stick with the drugs that we know well. And I don't see SARMs as being what I would call a lower risk drug. I see them as the highest possible risk a human being could take.
I think we're in the third or fourth wave of SARM popularity, but I would say that now it's kind of crumble on its own. It's
starting to crumble, yeah.
There will be a new form of SARM that will come soon, a form of endogenous and exogenous SARMs, a bit like a mixture of, let's say, an oral version of Kisspeptin, HMG, Proviron, Osterine, that kind of compound. There's still chemists under the radar that work on it, and I will be that in a year or two there will be endo-exo type SARM that would be much healthier. And the only why the SARMs were popular is because it was not an injectable version. And
Correct.
that's
Oral administration pathway.
And brother, the steroids market, 33% of the steroid market disappear for SARMs. Even if people don't believe in it, even the youth, they say we don't care. Cancel culture. We don't want injectable. We want swallowing stuff that could be safe or not or whatever. It brings me the beach body. You know, you're not gonna do a top 3 national light heavy with SARMs.
No, agreed.
Awesome.
Agreed. I guess that's the separation point between our two strategies is I look at it from the point of view of saying, look, there's very clearly I'm sure you're familiar with the Goldman Dilemma. It's a famous study done where they basically put this model to athletes saying, look, if you could take this compound and win the gold medal at the Olympics, but you knew within 5 years you would die of a cardiovascular event, would you take it? And some percentage of people said, yes, I would. Elite athletes. I am more interested in
the swimmer had retired very young.
Yeah. So I'm more interested. In fact, there was relatively recently a study, admittedly it was out of Brazil, so that's they're very image conscious there, that said, look, about 16% of people in commercial gyms are either historical, current, or they're thinking about using PEDs. That's a mind-boggling number of individuals. Yeah. And yet we have perhaps it would be fair to say a fraction of 1% fall into that category where what you're talking about, the extreme individual. Yeah. And this is where my audience, my message is really towards the mass market of even what I would call performance and image enhancement, not the extreme levels. And I try to say to them, listen, the SARMs is high risk. GW1516, it failed toxicology. YK11 was abandoned for a reason. We have no idea why it was abandoned. It must have been abandoned for a logical, probably commercial reason. It was abandoned, but nobody can say why. Oh, that's safe. We'll just use it. And this is what I'm getting at, is saying, I'm trying to put the message out there saying, look, if you're an extreme athlete, you probably need to take extreme measures. I know I'm not your mother. I'm not here to get in your way. But for most people, most of the time, you can get fabulous outcomes from very low dose anabolics, a little GH, a little insulin, a little bit metformin, maybe a PPAR agonist like telmisartan, and put these together and have a protocol that there's no logical reason that you couldn't use for 30 years.
Yeah, there's international law, and most of the SARMs now are illegal. Both in Canada, both in US, both in China in production, both in China in importation. Trump has, there's Hong Kong is the flexible country of export and import.
Yes.
And now mainland in Hong Kong is kind of in friction. So, and then Trump says some CAS number that order US patent, you don't make any more VR Cialis or I'll put you in jail. And there's friction like that for trademark. So they change drug to precursor, postcursor, and change the CS number to allow YK mainland import-export of new drugs that works compound or have better half-life, or maybe they're a bit toxic, whatever, but people are happy with it. The thing is, Chinese are very smart. They really work hard to monopolize the drug industry. Some SARMs that disappear, and as SARMs getting less popular, there's less availability to it in raw form, so it was eventually disappear on its own, and there will be new endo-exo that the CAS, and it will not have any friction in a United States type trademark, and it will grow on its own. The thing is, the kid of today wants kind of a very fast result and very maybe low input of work. They want almost like this. The dream is, I'm buying something that would alter my body right away. So eventually that false perception crumble on its own, and say they do SARMs. Eventually they see what's the top of it, and then they go to steroids. So it's kind of a mid-plunge introduction. So usually me, I do 1-2 cycle of SARMs, and then they go to steroids. Or they go SARMs, Proviron, Asterine, Aromacin, Arimidex, Winstrol, just for the fun of, and then they go to steroids. Sometimes it's a time of willingness, adaptation. At the same time, you don't want to be a coach to, no, you'll go right into testosterone, no SARMs for you, it's dangerous, blah, blah, blah. It's like, if he did 3 weeks of GW, yeah, it wasn't toxic, but he will recover. He's 20, 21, he eats good, he does his cardio, he does his fasting, he's very focused, he sleeps well, he can handle it. It's better he takes GW than go party and take ecstasy. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I always relate to people that the single most dangerous thing that I do is I ride a motorcycle. And I ride a motorcycle in Thailand. I can't think that you could possibly take anything that even equates to that level of risk. You take your life into your own hands every time I start that machine and take it out on the road. So I completely agree with you there. Can I just ask a couple of questions about what your position is for female use of PEDs? Are you happy to talk about that?
Yeah. Actually, I kind of like LGD for women, even though it could be labeled on men suppressive. I find it has good result. I like 500 microgram Arimidex, kind of shed estrogen, but not too much that they kind of compile. I like 10 milligram Proviron, 20 milligram Winstrol, very low T3, like 12.5 microgram twice a week, just for self-regulation of T3. Of course, if you play with thyroid function, you have to look at the TSH blood panel. You don't do that just.
And when you get people using T3, do you typically co-administer T4 at the same time, or you don't put them together?
Yeah, T3, T4 blend. I do a 25 microgram, 100 microgram ratio. But what I said, I only use twice a week. I don't want over metabolize, because what's great will crash. So if you go just twice a week on a cycle, it's kind of take out the strain or the pull down. So it's kind of just a modulation. That's how I use thyroid function. Maybe LGD pre-workout, not for a long time. Arimidex 2-3 times a week, just 500 microgram. Has to be pharma, cannot be generic, because generic, even though some UGL hab has a Turbo blender, the microgram could be a bit off. Proviron 10 milligram every day. Winstrol 20 milligram, 21 days. So when I look at the cycle of a woman, I still want that kind of almost menstrual rhythm. I follow the moon, 28 days, 21 days cycle. Make sure she's grounded, barefoot, meditation, creativity, that kind of holistic lifestyle of eating, colors, the anaminic ideology. And even though she uses hormones, I want her to be very grounded into nature, going into nature, walk into nature, swim, play drum, dance, theater, allow emotion to express, etc. But 3 weeks, not too often. If they have figure, bodybuilder, GH, obviously, very low dose, 1-2 units, only pharma, because often generic, the stability of a sucralose binder doesn't really last that long. That's why a Serrano is $1,000 and generic GH is about $200, because of the sucralose, the way they liquefy and press cake. So using 10 units and a full vial of GH, generic GH for women could be too much. That's why I prefer low quality growth hormone. So low GH, low Arimidex, low T3, maybe Clan very safely, sublingual spray, 20 microgram, and Winstrol, Proviron, Turinabol perhaps, depends who, what kind of sport. If it would be MMA, I might go with Masteron to fight. If it's CrossFit, I will go with EPO, but with a doctor that understands what's going on, and to make sure that she's not straining her health at risk, and make sure that she's not tested at the federation also. So 2-3 weeks stop before competition. So yeah, I mean, there's more to it, but
oh yes, of course, it's extremely complicated. I'm curious on your take. We had a very brief dialogue about post-cycle therapy, and I wanted to get some feedback from you about two things. One, firstly, before we get into the literature that you introduced me to, because it's a new subject for me, and I'd like to get your take on that. Just quickly, your take on post-cycle therapy for women that are using suppressive compounds. Do you support that? What is your position?
No. With women, I make them do cycle 2-3 times a year. Let's say I have a girl, she's going grandmaster figure in a year. She'll do Boston Pro qualifier and master figure, and then she'll do grandmaster maybe overall at 50 at the North Americans. And you see, we have almost like a year and a half. In a year and a half, she will do 3-4 cycle of 3 weeks. So for a woman, you need an outstanding natural athlete, or it's not going to happen. And you need someone that, with a woman, there's so much feedback loops, complexity that you could look at blood check, but I prefer like, oh, I try Arimidex. How do you feel? Is that yes or no? If it's no, garbage. We don't fight it. You never fight you never want to disturb the hormonal ecosystem at the emotional level with a female. And the thing is, depends who and what. You don't want to be, clitoris always on, always horny, that kind of thing. That's the threshold of, okay, it's done. You kind of tiptoes to a steroid state, and once it actually works, you stop. That's how I do it with women. So they don't really go on a cycle. They just dabble to it, touch it, and stop. That's it.
Okay. So the subject that I've been very keen to get into is, you sent me across some papers to read about a product called Kisspeptin. So is that correctly pronounced?
Yes.
This is a subject which I freely admit I know nothing about. So I was hoping you could give me some understanding of the role of this hormone and its application to our tribe. You see it as a post-cycle therapy adjunct. Is that fair? Is that what you?
Me, BLP, I've always been anti-PCT all my life. I want the guy to go 8 months off, 4 months nothing, completely nothing. Maybe GH, maybe 1GF, maybe peptide, maybe stuff that modulate bone density, PCP 157, TB 500. Stuff like that. But I never believe in PCT till someone really crashed extremely, let's say 1 gram of trenanintate and nothing's come back. Then I will do triptorelin 100 microgram, maybe once or twice. But it's an extreme scenario for an extreme case. I've always been anti-PCT because I want the body to bring back a natural. I believe sleep, a good central nervous system, and a natural good lifestyle that's healthy and makes sense and rational will bring back the person. For me, a cycle is like a party. You party, you recover. If you had party, 3 speed, 2 ecstasy, and you're depressed for 4 weeks, never touch drug again. It's not for you. If you're capable of doing a 7-8 month cycle, stop for 4 months. And yes, maybe after 3 months, your gym's kind of a bit weaker, less intensity. But at the same time, it allows to be the wife, travel, enjoy life, letting go of the bodybuilding obsession, be on earth, and then you can go back on cycle. And that everything completely, radically changed when Kisspeptin happened.
Okay.
Because letrozole once a week is healthy. Clomid block estrogen in the brain. I'm like, I'm not sure about that. Unless you want kids, maybe. HMG is okay, but HMG in Canada is about $1,000.
Expensive.
ACG I find very neurotoxic, bad on someone that's lots of weight. If you're 170 post cycle, you do HCG, you'll be fine. But if you're like 260 and been like on drugs for 7-8 months, I really doubt you'll feel weird on HCG, which aromatize and neurotoxic. So when the Kisspeptin happened, and like, it was in research for a while, but it's marketedly available since 2-3 months.
Mm-hmm.
It brings everything: LH, HPTA, FSH, sperm mobility, sperm function, sperm structure, no aromatization, can be used on or off cycle. I know some people, they don't like HPTA stimulant on testosterone, but it can be, especially if you said, I want kids later on in my life. That's more the question. So you coach a bodybuilder, you want kids later? Okay, we might do Kisspeptin a little bit in your cycle to make sure we conserve. And if you really want to be safe, you sperm count, sperm genesis count, the count of sperm mobility structure. And if it's very weak, you cryogenize the sperm to use it later on in life to have babies. And if not, if you're like Coleman, can have 7 kids, good for you. Everyone is different. Or sometimes people have children when they have very big cycle and then she gets pregnant. There's some kind of magical moments like that. But Kisspeptin is no side effect. Super healthy, super clean drugs. Steroids didn't really change that much, but PCT with that, it's a new game plan. And I'm telling you, okay, I think younger, I had very low testosterone. That's why I went into steroids and kind of feel like who I was. It took me out of the little bit of inhibition and stuff, but I'm sure I had low testosterone. I have no proof of it, but I know what's an alpha naturally and who I was. There's a mismatch there. And after 5 years off of every drugs, eventually the libido goes down, obviously. I used Kisspeptin. I felt like my gonads were the fullest in my life ever, even when I was 18 years old. It was so crazy, I took the hands of my wife, I'll be a bit graphic, I said, touch my balls. I cannot believe how full they are. I said, they've never been so full ever. And I was so happy. And not that, I wake up with a hard-on, which didn't happen like in maybe 10 years. I had an hard-on after having sex and orgasm. I had natural desire. I look at women, I look at my wife. There is a change. And I didn't have any side effect, no headache, no feel of I need Nolvadex because my estrogen is high with HCG. It was very smooth. And I was convinced, and I said, you know what? I'll buy like 20 bottles. I send to all my friends, and they're going to try and give me back reply. And I know it's not like a research.
Can you explain what the proposed dosing would look like? What sort of protocol is involved?
Usually a bottle has 2 milligrams, and I did 3 weeks with 2 milligrams. So I
spread it out daily.
Yeah. So because of chronobiology, the pattern of gene clock and circadian, I would not say super important, the timing of drugs, but it's getting trendy. So I will use Kisspeptin at the same time of the day every day. And I don't know if I'm willing to use it on a year basis, but now I'm like at 9 weeks and I feel pretty confident. I'll do blood tests maybe in 2-3 weeks from now. I'm not scared of the COVID, but to go where all people sick doing blood tests, I feel a bit like, no, it's not a good time. So I'll wait that the COVID kind of, the worriness of the COVID goes, and then I'll do blood check. And, but so far, so good. So far, it's been amazing. And I always had a love in 8-PCT. I always felt that it was a lack of willpower and human strength and human stamina to kind of create some kind of for me, people recover smooth on off pretty easily. And if your off is awful and you feel like killing yourself and stuff, don't touch steroids. It's not made for you. It's not made for you.
It's very interesting. As I said, it's a compound that's only really just become commercially practical, correct? So it's
there's only 2 companies that make it in the world.
Couple of months on the market. Very, very interesting. Excellent. Well, we're up to an hour and a half. I think that probably might be long enough for most people that are listening. For me, is there anything else that you wanted to as a last thing you wanted to talk about today? Any last subject or any point you wanted to make?
So let's me, I like long conversation, 2, 3, 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
It allows to, you know, the extra butter to leave and to get to the core, the heart.
Get to the juice.
Yeah, and to the juice of the real core. So what are your hypertrophy type cycle for mass? Let's say someone is 5'9", 240, 20 weeks out from national super heavy. He wants to be the biggest as he can. What will be your type protocol for that demographic? So super heavy, national level, young, 25, 26, wants to be top 3 national super heavy in Canada, which is a very tough contest. Lots of monster. 5'8", 5'9", wants 20, 25 pounds of mass in the shortest time possible, if body is allowed. What would be your type protocol?
I guess this is the challenge with these conversations is always, in my opinion, the answer is it depends.
Yeah.
It depends. The answer is always it depends. Context is so profoundly important in this.
Yes.
What I would argue is, look, unless someone has the genetics for this game, why would you expose yourself to this risk profile? It just doesn't make any sense. Do you know? And in my experience with that,
the thing is, you have to understand that some people, they have nothing else in life. They only see bodybuilding. They don't want to learn. They don't want to read. They don't want to create movie. They don't want to. They just want to bodybuild. And you cannot refrain someone to have high expectation from their own genetics. They will realize eventually they can't.
I guess the way I would answer that question, though, is I have had the great privilege of working with a relatively small number of extremely gifted individuals. Most people that I work with are just average people, and a few guys get hit with the unlucky stick. But I consider myself just to be, I'm neither blessed nor cursed. At over 50 last year, I competed in the over 50 Mr. Universe and came 6th. And the only reason I came 6th is because I'm the last man standing. I like to say, everybody else has fallen by the wayside. As you said, people get 10 or 15 years out of this game, and in my opinion, they're forced out of the game, not because they want to necessarily stop. They kind of have to, either through injuries or catastrophic muscle tears, or they've had a health scare. And this is my great passion, trying to explain to people, look, if you truly have what it takes, don't let me stand in your way. Go and pursue your dreams. But those individuals I've worked with, quite bluntly, I have explained to people what I've put those people on, and everyone says I'm fucking lying, because they don't understand that those individuals respond just fabulously well to what doesn't make any sense in terms of dosages. They just hyper responders. Do you know? Yeah. And so what I find is there's almost 2 discussions here. There's what would you need to give the average guy to give him a chance to stand on the stage? And in my opinion, it's a little scary. And then you have the individuals, like, I'll give you an example. I have no evidence to support this. Absolutely none. And when I explain what I'm saying, you go, of course you don't. But someone like Dexter Jackson is, in my opinion, the epitome of longevity. Been at this game a very long time. And he still looks fresh, still looks good.
Yeah, unbelievable.
And I think people would be absolutely shocked by what he takes, purely on a logic basis, to say, look, he's been at this so long now and he still looks so good. I think people would be surprised that a lot of amateurs are probably taking a lot more drugs than he is.
Of course.
In my experience, as you go down the line, the guy that comes 10th at the regional show sometimes is taking more than the guy that's has a chance at a pro card, because he just doesn't have the work ethic, and he doesn't have the commitment, and he doesn't have the genetics. And so to him, more drugs is the answer. And this is where, if I was very honest with you, I don't think that you should need to take more than, say, 1,000 milligrams of testosterone. I'm a big fan of Primobolan. I do like Primobolan. So if you said 1,000 milligrams of testosterone, 1,000 milligrams of Primobolan, growth hormone, very, very, very moderate levels of insulin, surprisingly moderate levels of insulin.
Let's talk about insulin, okay? So for me, Lentus in morning will be the anti-catabolism king of
Absolutely.
a 24-hour lifespan.
Absolutely.
So I do 2-3 times a week within, let's say, 15-20 units, very safe. Then I will do maybe Humalog, 5 units pre-workout. If it doesn't make the person tired and there's a good reaction to it,
yeah.
And then maybe 10-15 units Insulin and post-workout. And I will kind of make the person, let's say, not eat post-workout, use GH insulin at the same time, and then have his meal, that kind of pattern.
I couldn't agree with you more. I completely agree. The challenge, of course, is that so many people that aspire to this business, they don't have the work ethic and they don't have the genetics. They don't believe that. They just go, that can't be right because I'm taking 100 units of Lantus and I'm not getting the result. And this is where I just said, it's a difficult question to answer because on the occasions that I've been blessed enough to work with genetically gifted individuals, the doses that I use, that's the sort of doses, and they respond fabulously well to them. You just don't need to.
I don't think you need more than that.
Yeah.
I see too much insulin use as almost like a negative potassium retention, which is dangerous on health. That's how I see it.
But I would argue I see that across the board with every possible enhancement tool they have is overuse. Yeah. And I think that's just been something that has culturally been growing for decades and decades and decades. It's been building and building and building. It's not this generation. It's just every generation seems to push the envelope a little harder. I remember when I first got exposed to drugs, I was scared of these compounds. They were scary. I speak to 25-year-olds today. They have lost the fear, as it were. That might sound very strange, but I think a bit of healthy respect, a little bit of healthy fear goes a long way because it makes you very cautious and you do things moderately rather than jumping in with both feet. Where angels would fear to tread. So to answer your question, because I don't want to seem like I'm squirting the question, I think what you need to give people to get to that level is more profoundly influenced by their work ethic and their genetics rather than a model that applies to everybody. And I am fairly adamant that when people come to me and I see the doses they're using, the first thing I try to do is I try to lower those doses, and either people do respond very well with lower doses or they don't, and the ones that don't tend to not respond emotionally well to that strategy. They feel frustrated and upset and angry that you're in and I usually don't work with them for very long. And I don't know that that's a bad thing because I can't see that going to any good place. Not good for them and not good for me. So I'm very strategic in the individuals that I will work with at those doses. I think any man, like you talked about Masteron, but just going back to that, one of the things that I think is important for people to understand is many of my clients are older guys. They're attracted to me because I'm over 50 and they see me as them. And he's one of us. So a lot of those guys, I have them on very low dose Masteron, a little testosterone, a little Masteron, a little Proviron. And, that combination is just absolutely fabulous for your sex life because, Masteron is an active prolactin inhibitor. It modulates prolactin actively. So as your prolactin goes down, of course, and your testosterone is elevated beyond, physiological range and a little bit of Proviron.
And what do you think of Masteron intake?
My personal opinion on esters is this, and that is, if you look at the history of the esterized versions of hormones, it was all premised on a time where you needed to go to the doctor's office for administration. So back in the day, before doctors were prepared to hand you a vial of testosterone, esters mattered, and a lot of companies spent a lot of money into researching, multi-ester blends, things like Sustanon and things like this. But the reality is that I'm an advocate of what I call microdosing. In other words, very small amounts of drugs every day. Now, I understand that.
So let's say if we do 10 milligram test probe, 10 milligram Masteron probe, and 10 milligram Promobol and subskin
Yeah,
every
every day.
day.
Yeah. So if we to do
You
that
like
every
that?
day, yeah, absolutely. I think that's fabulous. But my point would be, if you did it every day, to a very large degree, the ester becomes almost meaningless because the ester needs to be cleaved from the hormone. You administer it as a prodrug. As a prodrug with the ester attached, it is incapable of binding with the androgen receptor. So the ester has to be cleaved. Sorry, the ester has to be cleaved for the hormone from the prodrug to become an active hormone. And then once the ester is cleaved, then if you're doing microdosing, what is the difference? The only real difference that I could put my finger on is there are genes responsible for cleaving esters, and some people seem to respond better to one ester over another genetically, individual genetic variation. But if you were to say, okay, so here's an individual, we're going to give him, like you said, 10 milligrams of this compound every day subcutaneously, does the ester that he chooses under that model matter very much? And I would argue it's minutiae. It's a very small point. Yes, I do agree that you might find an individual that responds better to this ester or that ester, but that's his genetics that you can't determine
But
from a framework.
let's say you use glycine and creatine to optimize methylation to get rid of ester metabolite that you don't want, and you will do every day, but you have the nutritional ecosystem, neurotransmitter health, stomach health to help metabolite toxicity to be handled. You will still prefer every other day? Because for me, the body likes regulation, and I find that every other day, even though it has the punch of your ester, it's almost like one day you're high, one day you're low, one day, and that could alter mood.
I think you might have misheard me there. I'm advocating every day.
Okay, cool.
Every day. But the point I'm making is, if you do it every day, and the dose is moderate, I do agree with some points you're making, but I think that, you know, if you start to get into multi-gram doses, there is a decent argument to be made about the impact of the ester. Do you know? But I think if you're using very small amounts, those doses you said, 10 milligrams, 10 milligrams, 10 milligrams, these are small doses of the drug. Do you know?
Yeah.
And when you cleave the ester off, that ester doesn't have significant impact. If you meant 50 milligrams a day, yes, I agree. This is the context discussion. So 10 milligrams, 10 milligrams every day, I don't think the ester matters. I really just haven't seen that in my experience. Obviously, the enanthate and the cyprinate ester, for all intents purposes, have identical pharmacokinetics profiles. They are not the same ester, that's technically true, but they are almost identical. But as you shorten the administration frequency down to daily dose, it becomes less and less and less.
Sorry to cut you off, but you will go as far as saying that test phenyl probe or test acetate, the non-ester test, will be as sufficient as testosterone intake?
What I would argue is I don't know anyone that should necessarily use non-esterized hormones. I don't agree with that. Yeah, I think that an ester should be attached. So my question would be this: is there a significant difference between someone that wanted to use test propionate, test enanthate, test cyprinate, or even so far as Sustanon? If you took 10 mil a day, the ester becomes almost meaningless. I'm not saying that a suspension is a good idea. I don't support suspensions, not the least of which the reason is they're not terribly easy to find. Most high quality laboratories don't sell suspension.
It's very hard to
very hard to find. And so most of the people that sell it, they tend to be tier 3, tier 4, tier 5 suppliers. You're a long way down the food chain. If you go up to the tier 1 suppliers, they don't even supply it. So it's an interesting thing. But as I said, I would make one, I guess, argument. If you're administering growth hormone, if you're administering insulin, as you said, under that model, which I fully support, why wouldn't you do micro daily dosing of your anabolics as well? There's a benefit to that, in my opinion.
How about the libido? How about the test on the canoid that lasts?
I'm just not a fan of that product at all. I'm sorry. It's just, in my
You don't
experience,
believe
it's not that. It's just, I guess what I said before is many of my clients are older men, and they just want to be the best version of themselves. And they are not competitive bodybuilders. They're not trying to pack on 30 pounds of muscle. They're looking for quality of life outcomes and, perhaps some performance advantage, but relatively moderate. And many of them come to me using gels and creams and, implants and all sorts of things, dissatisfied with the outcome. They're saying, I was expecting more. And I find that when they move to, daily micro administration subcutaneously, they, even at the same dose, they feel significantly better subjectively.
How about the Natesto, the intranasal version?
I honestly have no personal experience with it, and I've never had a client that used it, so I cannot
use it
speak to that.
myself. I really love it, but it sadly got banned in Canada for quality purposes. But it's getting now in Japan. It's legal now in US.
Okay.
And it's because it's intranasal, it's olfactory, it's very close to the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it goes as the bloodstream of testosterone to build muscle, but it has a limbic olfactory neural perception to it, access interaction. So it's very enhancing as the well-being of testosterone. It's like you get the cognitive positive aspect of testosterone. Does it improve mass? Not at all, but I thought it was pretty cool, and it's sad that the Canada had banned it.
Interesting. All right, fabulous conversation. As I said, I do take on board your point about multi-hour conversations. The challenge, of course, is sometimes with time zone for me. I was up until last night till 4 a.m. doing a podcast. Wow. Let's do this. Maybe I've absolutely thoroughly enjoyed talking to you. Maybe we could just.
There is something I didn't say with Masteron before we end the communication.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
There is a homemade version that's like my creativity, BLP creativity. We take the drostanolone powder and we mix with DMSO and we put on people that have a gyno kind of felt to it. Okay. So I cost nothing, almost nothing to try. I was curious, what's your vibe regarding this? That stupid idea is a good idea? Doesn't work? I mean, or once gyno is there, it's always stay there. What's your vibe?
I guess never having tried it, I'm not opposed to experimentation, but never having tried it. What I would say about gynecomastia is that, in my opinion, many people don't understand what the underlying cause of gyno is, which is, at the end of the day, an imbalance between the stimulatory inputs on breast tissue and the inhibitory inputs, and they don't understand that androgens have an inhibitory input on breast tissue, but both estrogen, IGF-1, growth hormone, prolactin, progestin, all of these things have stimulatory inputs, all of them. Yeah, and it's very, very difficult in a polypharmacy setting to say exactly what is doing what. Beyond one thing and saying, look, you either go and get blood work and let the blood work tell you what the underlying pathology is. This is the obvious option, but people don't want to do this. People are not, keen to run off to the, God, if I had a pathology lab down the corner, it was free, I'd be there every fucking day. I love blood work, yeah? But I think it's fair to say that most people don't have that love. So I kind of say to guys, look, the ultimate answer to this is, as long as your androgen to estrogen ratio is in balance, yeah, then the stimulatory inputs and the inhibitory inputs will balance each other out. And you can run very high levels of estrogen and very high levels of these other stimulatory inputs, prolactin and progestin, provided you have a high enough androgen inhibitory input, which means drugs like testosterone and Masteron and Proviron are our best friends. Drugs that, testosterone as a base, but not too much, and then bringing in. So my suggestion to people is this: you should start your testosterone at 2 milligrams per kilogram. So if you're an 80 kilogram man, that means 160 milligrams per week of testosterone. And you should gradually titrate the dose up until you discover what your personal individual threshold for testosterone is. You'll find out what that is pretty quickly. Yeah, most guys can tolerate about 300 to 400 milligrams of testosterone a week before they start to experience issues. About that point. Yeah, that depends obviously on body composition and age and many factors. But as a general rule of thumb, guys can tolerate a certain amount. And then from that point onwards, rather than using, you know, a SERM or an aromatase inhibitor, I like the old school approach. This is what Masteron was used for originally, the treatment of, you know, estrogen-mediated breast cancer. So we use Masteron in that capacity. We slowly walk up the Masteron, we slowly walk up the Proviron. So there is no need to use AIs, there is no need to use SERMs, but I completely agree. I do completely agree. The moment you have a guy that's saying, I'm going to use 1,000 milligrams or 1,200 milligrams of testosterone, the stimulatory inputs are just so great that you are forced to use one. You don't have a choice. Do you know? So this is why I try to get guys to design cycles to say.
Sorry to cut you off, but I have a specific question now.
Yeah.
Is how you will regulate estrogen to be able to be 4% body fat? Because I don't think it's possible to go to 4% body fat with higher estrogen range. It has to be flat eventually.
I could not agree with you more. Absolutely. But here's the thing, and this is what you have to understand of the 16% of individuals in Brazil that are currently either historically or thinking about using PEDs. How many of those people will ever get to 4%? A fraction of 1%.
No.
So in other words, 99.5% of people have no need for estrogen blocking. But I completely agree. You know, tools like letrozole, I think, have no place in responsible PED use, but you're never going to get to 4% without it. You need it to create that look, but I would argue that it's not sustainable, nor is it healthy. And this is part of my argument where you have guys that say, you can only do this for 10 years. I go, I agree if you're doing that, but let's say this. Let's say we found out what your personal individual threshold was for testosterone without needing an AI and without needing DHT blockers. Let's just figure that out together. And then we put something like 200 milligrams of Masteron and 25 milligrams of Proviron and 5 units of Humalog and 2 units of growth hormone and 500 milligrams of Metformin and maybe telmisartan as people. You are what I call the superhuman man, right?
Yeah. But Metformin has a bad rap, I think. It has good rap in terms of longevity, but in terms of bodybuilding, I'm a bit biased. Because if I would do Metformin as a bodybuilder, I would use it on non-training day, and that's about it.
You're concerned about its capacity to blunt the hypertrophic effect?
Yes.
Okay. Can I answer that? Because it's a great point.
But I'm not a specialist, but I will send you to the queen of the Metformin in terms of the argument that I felt that was very strong. Is Rhonda Patrick regarding Metformin.
The challenge, of course, is this. If you said to me, does Metformin blunt hypertrophic effect? The answer is without question, absolutely yes. But here's the caveat. You have to understand that if you give Metformin to a natural man, 2 things will happen. One is his testosterone will be blunted. It does suppress testosterone levels, number one. The second thing it does is consequential to lower serum insulin levels, you lower growth factors. So hello, what do you expect the outcome to be? Blunted hypertrophic outcomes, right? And this is demonstrated not only in mechanism, but there is actually a study in elderly people undergoing resistance training where they gave them Metformin, and guess what they saw? Blunted hypertrophy. But here's the thing is, the reason they saw it was if you give an 80-year-old man who's natural a drug that lowers testosterone and lowers insulin and lowers growth factors consequentially, what would you expect to happen? Now, give the same dose of Metformin to someone who's using all these growth promoters, and I'm not going to say that it doesn't blunt, but it's almost like the degree of magnitude that it blunts is so fucking small you can just forget about it. And then what you get in return is improved insulin sensitivity. So the toll that you must pay to get the insulin sensitivity is worth every penny. So in other words, it's So I want insulin sensitivity. I'm taking these compounds. I'm behaving in these ways that lower insulin sensitivity. Here's a drug that improves insulin sensitivity, but it comes at a price. The price is blunted hypertrophic effect, agreed. But to what magnitude? This bit. And we have all of these fucking tools that are doing this. So in other words, it's like saying, well, instead of getting 100 units of growth, I'm going to get 98, but in return, I get insulin sensitivity improvement. And I would sign that pack every day of the year.
There's a negative study on metformin related to neural repair.
Yep.
I always send you the link when we hang up.
Of course, the challenge, although I agree, I know the study you're talking about. Of course, the challenge with that is then you can never really look at one study in isolation. You have to look at the balance. Yeah. And metformin today still remains as a drug candidate for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease. So you have this body of information on one level. It's still it's being evaluated at the moment for all sorts of conditions, including benign prostate hyperplasia, which is good for us, and it does this, and it does this, an anti-cancer drug, It's an Alzheimer's treatment candidate, but then there's a rat study that says, okay, it might be bad for a brain. I would put that down as interesting, and we need to read it, but it's not a reason to dismiss the drug out of hand. Yeah? Are you still there? I think I lost you a little bit. Are you back?